The massacre at Epsilon V. The first warning came in the form of a silent void. Dr. Alara Vasquez stared at the emergency comms panel, her hands trembling as she refreshed the system for the 10th time. The distress signals from the outer relay stations had gone dark an hour ago. No chatter, no automated beacons, just silence. The last transmission from Station Gamma 7 had been a garbled mess of static and screams before it cut off entirely. Epsilon V had no weapons, no soldiers, only doctors, researchers, and relief workers. It was humanity's greatest humanitarian outpost, built to aid refugees and heal the wounded from wars they had no part in. The Galactic Empire had acknowledged Epsilon V's neutrality for years, but something had changed, and now the sky was burning. The attack began with orbital bombardment. Without warning, a fleet of Imperial warships emerged from hyperspace, their dark forms blotting out the stars. The first strike was precise, a tungsten rod fired from orbit, smashing into the central medical complex. A second later, the shock wave tore through the facility, reducing it to rubble. Dr. Vasquez barely had time to dive behind a reinforced pillar as the ground trembled. A fireball roared through the corridor, sending glass and debris raining down. Screams filled the comms as surgeons, nurses, and patients alike were incinerated in an instant. In the skies above, the Empire's elite shock troopers deployed. Drop pods slammed into the earth like meteorites, disgorging squads of heavily armed soldiers. Clad in black armor, their helmets devoid of emotion, they moved with terrifying precision. They were not here for conquest. They were here for extermination. The massacre was methodical. Dr. Vasquez stumbled through the wreckage, blood trickling down her forehead. Around her, medical staff and wounded civilians were rounded up like cattle. She saw her colleague, Dr. Imran Cho, begging for mercy as an Imperial officer raised a sidearm. A single shot. Cho collapsed, his white coat stained red. Nearby, a group of nurses huddled together, shielding a group of orphaned refugee children. One of the troopers raised his weapon. The children screamed. Then silence. Rage flared in Vasquez's chest, but she knew she couldn't fight. She could only run. She ducked into a side corridor, breath ragged, heart pounding. The emergency exit led to the underground tunnels beneath the hospital, where a few survivors might still be hiding. She activated her wristcom. This is Dr. Vasquez. Epsilon V is under attack. We need immediate evac. Static. A shadow loomed over her. She turned just in time to see a black-armored figure raise a stun baton. Pain exploded through her skull, and then darkness. When she woke, Epsilon V was gone. Dr. Vasquez was forced to kneel alongside the few remaining survivors, their hands bound, their faces hollow with despair. The Imperial officer overseeing the execution stood tall, his cold silver eyes scanning the broken remnants of what had once been a beacon of hope. Humanity overestimated its place in the galaxy, he said, voice laced with contempt. This is what happens to those who defy the natural order. He gestured to his troops. Rifles were raised. Dr. Vasquez closed her eyes. Gunfire erupted. Then nothing. Across the galaxy, humanity watched in horror as the final transmission from Epsilon V was broadcasted by an unknown source. The last image, a sea of bodies, their white medical uniforms stained with blood. The United Human Federation fell silent. Then, the silence turned to rage. And in the deepest shadows of human space, a vault was opened. A place where monsters had been caged for decades. The vaults of forgotten monsters. The meeting took place in a secure war room deep beneath the UHF Central Command on Earth. The air was thick with tension, and the weight of the massacre at Epsilon V hung over every soul in the chamber. A massive hollow display projected the final images from the colony. The ruins, the bodies, the cold efficiency of the Galactic Empire's slaughter. Admiral Tobias Rains, a man known for his unshakable resolve, stood at the head of the table. His gray eyes burned with fury as he addressed the gathered officials, generals, and intelligence directors. "We can't win this war the way we've been fighting," he stated grimly. The Empire has crushed our greatest healers, believing it would weaken us. They believe we are soft, that we will grieve and move on. He paused, letting his next words settle like a knife in the gut. They are wrong. Across the table, Defense Minister Helena Vorst leaned forward. We've considered all options: diplomacy, open warfare, strategic sabotage. None will achieve the vengeance Epsilon V demands. Which leaves us with one final alternative. A hush fell over the room. Everyone knew what she meant. Project Abyss. Beneath the cold, dead surface of an unnamed planet on the edge of human space, there was a prison that did not officially exist. A place where humanity had buried its most terrifying creations. Monsters too dangerous to kill, too brilliant to waste. The Vault. A mile of reinforced metal, quantum-locked containment cells, and automated defenses designed to ensure that nothing ever escaped. This was where the worst war criminals in human history were entombed. And now, for the first time in decades, its doors were opening. Admiral Rains descended deep into the facility, his boots echoing against the steel floors. Security personnel stood rigid as he passed, their faces betraying discomfort at what was about to happen. They reached the heart of the vault, a massive circular chamber lined with stasis pods. Each one contained a name that had once been whispered in terror across the stars. General Kane Volker, the Butcher of Arcturus. Dr. Celine Voss, the Bioweapon Queen. Dante the Wraith Sorrento, Master of Shadow Warfare. And dozens more. Their crimes had been unspeakable. Genocides, bioplagues, psychological warfare that broke entire species. They had been locked away because even humanity had deemed them too monstrous to walk free. But today they were needed. One by one, the pods hissed open. The figures inside took their first breath in decades. General Kane Volker was the first to step forward, cracking his neck as if waking from a short nap. His eyes, sharp as razors, took in his surroundings before locking onto Rains. "Admiral," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Tell me, who do you need killed?" Rains didn't flinch. "The Galactic Empire massacred our people at Epsilon V. They slaughtered our doctors, our healers, our children. We are giving you one mission: destroy them. Completely." Volker chuckled, running a scarred hand through his graying hair. "And here I thought you locked us away, because you were afraid of what we do." Dr. Celine Voss stepped out next, her icy gaze scanning the room. "We weren't imprisoned because we failed," she murmured. "We were imprisoned because we were too good at what we did." She turned to Rains, a slow smile creeping across her lips. "And now you want us back. No limits. No oversight," Rains said. "Do what must be done. Make the Empire fear humanity again." The war criminals exchanged glances. Then as one they nodded. Project Abyss had begun. The first step was reclaiming their tools of war. Dante Sorrento, the Wraith, led a strike team to the abandoned black site labs of the old interstellar wars, where experimental stealth technology had been hidden away. Within days, he had resurrected an entire fleet of undetectable infiltration ships. Dr. Voss reopened her secret research archives, unlocking data on engineered plagues and bioweapons designed to selectively target non-human DNA. Her work had been considered an atrocity before, but now it was salvation. Volker, ever the tactician, assembled the scattered remnants of Earth's most elite special forces. Soldiers who had fought and won impossible battles. Men and women willing to do the unthinkable. The war criminals did not rebuild an army. They forged a nightmare. And as the first Black Ops missions commenced, assassinations of high-ranking Imperial officials, sabotage of key supply lines, whispered terror campaigns, the Galactic Empire began to feel something it had never associated with humanity before. Fear. Far away, in the Imperial capital, Grand Moff Serevan watched as reports flooded in. Entire military outposts going dark. Key figures disappearing. Viral outbreaks of unknown origin. It was as if the shadows themselves had turned against the Empire. What is happening?" one of his advisors stammered. Serevan clenched his jaw. "The humans. He turned to his officers. They have abandoned their restraint. For the first time in its long history, the Empire realized it had made a mistake. They hadn't just killed humanity's doctors. They had unleashed its monsters. War without mercy. The Galactic Empire had fought wars before. It had crushed rebellions, eradicated species, and subjugated entire civilizations. But never had it faced an enemy like this. Not a nation, not an army, a shadow, a nightmare. Humanity had unleashed its monsters, and the war criminals of Project Abyss had no interest in conquest, diplomacy, or honor. They sought only vengeance, and they waged war in the way only those without a soul could. It was not a war of soldiers. It was a war of whispers, of unseen hands, of terror spreading like wildfire through the Empire's ranks. And it began with the destruction of Fortress Zaldun. The fall of Fortress Zaldun. Zaldun was one of the Empire's most fortified military installations, a planetary stronghold designed to withstand entire fleets. Its shields could repel orbital bombardments. Its defenses were automated and ruthless, and its elite garrison was among the best in the Empire. None of it mattered. When the attack came, it wasn't with fleets or armies. It began with silence. One by one, the fortress's satellites went dark. Communications with nearby systems were severed. Supply ships vanished without a trace. Patrols sent to investigate never returned. Panic spread through the garrison, but their commanders dismissed it. Then the sickness began. At first, it seemed like a simple fever. Soldiers and officers alike developed symptoms: fatigue, disorientation, minor tremors in their hands. But within hours, the effects escalated. Nervous system failure, hallucinations, the breakdown of higher cognitive functions. The medics were baffled. There was no trace of a virus, no known biological agent. Only death, creeping through the ranks like a phantom. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. Dr. Celine Voss had engineered something new, a weaponized neurosis. Not a disease, but a psychological disruption, transmitted through Imperial cybernetic implants. The very enhancements that made the Empire's soldiers superior had been turned against them. Their own minds were eating them alive. And when the first reports of mass suicides reached Imperial High Command, the realization set in. The humans had learned how to kill without even firing a shot. Terror strikes the Empire. As Zaldun fell, so too did the Empire's sense of control. Dante Sorrento, the Wraith, had begun his campaign. In the dead of night, entire Imperial supply convoys disappeared. Key Imperial governors were found in their palaces, their throats slit, their walls painted with messages written in their own blood. One by one, the Empire's strategic minds were eliminated, not by soldiers, but by assassins who left no trace. Whispers spread among the Imperial ranks. Some claimed the humans had become demons, their spirits walking unseen through Imperial corridors. Others believed the war criminals were more machine than man, their bodies enhanced beyond mortality. But all agreed on one thing. This was no longer a war. This was extermination. The nightmare of Nova Palace. General Kane Volker knew that fear alone wasn't enough. The Empire was vast, and its military was still powerful. To break it, he needed something more. He needed to make an example. That example was Nova Palace, a strategic shipyard world that supplied nearly a third of the Empire's fleet. Its orbital docks produced dreadnoughts and carriers, fueling the war machine that had raised Epsilon V. Volker did not attack with a fleet. He did not even give the Empire time to see it coming. The first sign of trouble came when the docked ships lost control of their artificial gravity. Engineers screamed as their bodies were torn apart by sudden gravitational shifts. Entire shipyards collapsed in on themselves, metal groaning and twisting under impossible forces. Then came the fire. Saboteurs had infiltrated the planet's main fusion reactors, overriding their safety measures. The Imperial engineers had no time to react before the core detonated, sending a chain reaction across the planet. Cities burned. The orbital docks shattered. The Empire's prized shipyards became a graveyard of floating debris. And as the survivors fled into space, they found only one transmission repeating on all channels. Epsilon V sends its regards. The Empire's fracturing. The Galactic Empire had never feared humanity before. Now fear was all it knew. Paranoia spread through the highest ranks. High-ranking officials no longer trusted their own soldiers, fearing infiltration. Some admirals outright refused to fight, believing their own fleets were compromised. Even the Emperor himself, once a figure of absolute control, began to withdraw into seclusion. But the war criminals were not finished. Not yet, for there was still one final step before the Empire could truly be broken. Not just its fleets, not just its leaders, but its very will to exist. And for that, they had one last weapon to unleash. A plague that could not be stopped. A whisper that turned to screams. A war with no mercy. The Empire begs for mercy. The Galactic Empire had ruled for centuries, its dominions stretching across thousands of worlds. It had crushed rebellions, conquered species, and brought entire civilizations to their knees. But now it was the one kneeling, not before diplomats, not before a superior army, before monsters. Humanity had stopped playing by the Empire's rules. No longer did they wage wars of attrition, battle over territories, or negotiate for peace. They had embraced total war, unrestricted, unrelenting, and utterly merciless. The final phase had begun, and there would be no salvation. The plague of silence. The first signs were subtle. Imperial officers began complaining of headaches, moments of confusion. Soon, the symptoms escalated: blackouts, erratic behavior, violent outbursts. At first, Imperial scientists believed it was some new form of psychological warfare. Then, the death began. Entire command centers were found silent. No signs of struggle, no alarms raised. Officers, engineers, and soldiers sat slumped in their chairs, eyes blank, faces frozen in expressions of confusion and horror. Dr. Celine Voss had crafted her masterpiece, a biological and neurological plague tailored only for the Empire's ruling class. It spread through the very cybernetic enhancements and genetic modifications that made them superior. There was no cure, no warning. One day, an officer would be speaking, giving orders. The next, he would simply stop, his mind erased in an instant. They called it the plague of silence. And as it spread, the Empire's infrastructure collapsed. Entire fleets were left adrift, their admirals dead without a single shot fired. Governors vanished overnight, their planets left in chaos. The Empire had believed itself untouchable. Now it was rotting from the inside. The death of the Emperor, the imperial capital, once a beacon of power, had become a city of ghosts. The streets were empty, fear strangling every soul that remained. Guards patrolled, but their hands trembled on their weapons. Every shadow, every flicker of movement could be an assassin, a saboteur, a whisper of death. And then, the whispers became real. Dante Sorrento, the Wraith, had been waiting for this moment. The Emperor had sealed himself inside his palace, surrounded by his most elite guards. No one came in or out. Entire legions had been assigned to defend him. None of it mattered. The first sign of the breach was the power failure. The second was the screams. The palace security systems were designed to repel entire battalions. Sorrento needed only 3 men. By the time the lights flickered back on, the throne room was drenched in blood. The Emperor, the man who had ordered the massacre at Epsilon V, the ruler of the greatest empire in the galaxy, was found impaled upon his own sword, his lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. His guards lay slaughtered around him, their armor split open like paper. Carved into the walls, in deep gouging marks, was a single phrase: "For the healers." And with that, the Empire's reign was over. The plea for mercy. The remnants of the Empire gathered on a shattered world near the galactic core. Once proud admirals, planetary governors, and surviving officers now stood broken, their faces hollow. A transmission was sent across all channels, reaching human space. They begged, not for peace, for survival. "We surrender," came the voice of Grand Moff Serevan, the last high-ranking Imperial official still alive. Please, no more. Humanity had won. But what came next? The choice that defined humanity. The war criminals stood before the United Human Federation. Their work complete. The Butcher of Arcturus, the Bioweapon Queen, the Wraith. The monsters had done their job. Now came the real question. Do they finish the Empire? Or do they spare it? Volker, ever the tactician, stepped forward. We erase them now, or they will rise again. That is the truth of war. Dr. Voss smiled coldly. They burned our doctors alive. Do we not owe them the same courtesy? But others hesitated. Humanity had won through sheer brutality. But was this truly victory? Or had they become something even worse than the Empire itself? For a long moment, the decision hung in the air. Finally, Admiral Rain spoke. His voice was quiet. The galaxy will never forget what we did. He turned toward the screen, toward the broken remnants of the Empire. Withdraw. The monsters of Project Abyss were silent. But they obeyed. The war was over. The Galactic Empire had been shattered. And across the stars, one truth remained. Humanity was no longer seen as weak. They were feared, and perhaps they always would be.